Hello and welcome to part 3 of my Deadzone video review. In part 1 I showed you how to play the game. Part 2 I showed you setup and sample gameplay. And in part 3 I'm going to give you my final opinion on Deadzone the game. Now if you're looking for the Reader's Digest version, Deadzone is basically a skirmish level miniatures game where each side is going to have missions and there's going to have objectives. They're basically trying to score points to wipe out the other team. Each player is going to build their squad anywhere from 4 to possibly 12 miniatures using the base set. Then they're going to face off on a board that uses movement by using squares versus traditional rulers, which may be more standard from your more standard miniatures-based skirmish level games. The base box does come with two very different factions. One's more of a swarm type of faction, the other one's more of an elite strike force with a smaller unit or a smaller squad, so they do both play differently, giving you an asymmetrical experience right out of the box. Deadzone retails for $100, and for that $100 you are seeing everything that's laid out before you, including all the miniatures, all the buildings, the mat, the cardboard tokens, and the cards. Everything, including the rulebook, all comes with a retail box for $100. But one caveat to that is everything comes disassembled. Now the miniatures need to be assembled and also the buildings need to be assembled. The buildings are part of a modeling system produced by Mantic, which allows you to build these various buildings of various patterns. There's the buildings that come in little squares, and you're going to use these 3x3 squares. They have various different designs on them, and then you're going to use connectors to build these buildings. You can build them as squares, you can build them any kind of pattern you can think of, and design various things from towers to half buildings to houses to various different designs just using what comes with the game. And now we come to my first major gripe with the components for Deadzone. Now, I hate to start with a whole bunch of negative for this game, but I need to get the negative out of the way so I can actually tell you how great the rest of the game really is. Now, overall, the components for Deadzone, once you get the game put together, it's really, really good. Getting to that put together position is extremely frustrating, painful experience. Now, in theory, all of these buildings use these connectors, which are supposed to be able to use snap in and snap out, and also be able to be reassembled and taken apart for easy storage. Now that's the theory. Unfortunately, and I don't know if it's just the first batch of these or just the Kickstarters, or maybe it's just they haven't quite perfected the technology behind these, but the connectors used for the game, they're hard plastic, just like these pieces, they're hard plastic. The problem is these connectors, in theory, snap into these little holes you see on these pieces. The problem is half the time you can't get the damn things to snap in there because they're either too big for the holes, or they're not molded perfectly, or something's preventing from perfectly snapping in there. So about half the time the connectors don't snap in there, and then the other half of the time when they do snap in there, when you pull them out, they snap, actually leaving little stubs inside these, meaning that they can't be reused at all. It is extremely frustrating. It's frustrating to the point that you're eventually just going to say, screw it, pull out some super glue, and you're going to build these buildings in a permanent pattern, and it's basically the way they're going to look every time you play the game. Now, I really hate to start with such a negative, especially since I really do like Deadzone and I have a lot of fun with the game. There's a lot of potential for this game, but I feel like if I don't give you a warning about this game before you just fully get invested and spend your $100 and get this basic box of parts, you're going to get frustrated, especially if you don't know exactly what you're getting into. So I need to give you this warning. Further, the miniatures themselves come in many, many small pieces. Now, I've built Games Workshop miniatures dozens of times. I played Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, back from the 80s all the way to early 90s I was playing Warhammer. So I remember putting those miniatures together, and now those miniatures were not half as frustrating as these miniatures were. I have had miniatures that I had to use the hot water trick to bend to get them to fit in their various poses. Now, don't get me wrong, I love how the poses are extremely dynamic with these miniatures. You get miniatures, you get all the troopers, and they all have the same stats, but they all have different poses. It looks really cool. Even the dogs themselves, you have two dogs, exact same stats, totally different dynamic poses, and that's really, really cool. The trick is when you get a box full of components with zero instructions, you have pieces that don't always fit 100% of the time, and you also have pieces that aren't perfectly molded. You have a recipe for utter frustration. I'm an experienced miniatures modeler. I've been playing with miniatures games for years. I've built miniatures from various companies. We've got companies like Games Workshop, which everybody knows about Games Workshop. I built models from Privateer Press. I've gotten models from Reaper Miniatures. I've been in miniatures for years and years and years. So when I say these models are frustrating, this is coming from somebody who has experience with miniatures. Now, to be totally fair, and just to, not sound like I'm being totally down on these miniatures, not all the miniatures are terrible. And in all actually, it's only about 10% of the miniatures that are bad. It's just that those 10% of the miniatures are so bad that they make the rest of the experience just very, very frustrating. I have miniatures, and actually I was a Kickstarter backer, so again, I got a lot more miniatures than what you see here, but I have some miniatures that have 2 left arms, and you can't tell that because the arms would not go on the right way, so I basically had to, because they give you extra arms to build your miniatures, I basically have a miniature who has 2 left arms. I have a miniature who I had to fill in some epoxy just to fill in one of the gaps between his shoulder blade, and until he was painted, it was very apparent how bad it was of a gap. I also have this guy with a rocket launcher. Now, while you may not be able to tell until you hold him up close, you'll notice that his left hand doesn't actually touch the rocket launcher. Now, originally, the hand is supposed to touch the rocket launcher, except in the beginning, the hand was actually all the way out here. I had to use the hot water trick of boiling hot water, putting the arm in plastic, trying to bend it, putting it in the hot water, bending it more, and I got as close as I could without it feeling like it was starting to snap, and I wasn't feeling gutsy enough to bend it anymore. But that's just to give you an idea of just how frustrating some of these models can be, especially if you're a modeler who would consider yourself, a perfectionist and you want these models to look really good. Overall, to be perfectly honest, putting these miniatures together and putting these buildings together is going to be a project for you. Now, if at the end of the review, after everything I've told you about this game, if everything is something that you think that you can have a lot of fun with, and you think you can get past this hurdle of getting into the game with the assembly, then I can wholeheartedly say you can ignore what I've said. Just get over it, use some glue, just take a few nights and dedicate to putting the stuff together, and once you've done it, you have a beautiful looking game on the table to play and enjoy with your friends. But, and this is the largest but I can add in here, if you're not willing to go through the frustration of assembling models that so far have 0 instructions, come in multiple little pieces. We're talking like each arm is their own piece. Sometimes each leg is their own piece. Sometimes the head is its own piece. Sometimes the backpacks are an extra piece. You're looking at some of these models being 8, 9, sometimes even 10 little pieces. And you see what I mean when I say that this is a project to assemble this game. But in all fairness, if you can get past that hurdle and put these miniatures together, I think they look really, really good. Now I have a whole bunch of images I'm going to start throwing up for you to go ahead and look at while I'm talking here. And I'm going to preface this by saying I did not go through and remove any mold lines just because I want to show you, let you get your own opinion how much these mold lines are going to bother you. I didn't, some of these you're going to see that all I did is just have the models put together so you can just see what they look like when they're unassembled or when they are assembled and unpainted, so you can judge and see just how much work you're willing to put into this. And I'm also going to show you a couple images of how many pieces these miniatures come in when you get them out of the box. Now, unfortunately, I know a lot of the miniature hobbyists are right now saying, yeah, duh, it's a miniatures game. You have a lot of work to put into it because that's generally what miniatures games are. Here's my slight problem with this. I think Mantic has done a fantastic job creating a board game with Jake Thornton, who was the designer of this game. They have created a board game which is a perfect hybrid between miniatures gaming and the actual board gaming hobby. I have presented this game in front of board gamers who have never been much into miniatures games because they don't like all the work that goes into it, especially with the minute miniature movement, the rulers, and all the little details and all the fiddliness that drives them absolute crazy. I have sat down, showed them how to play this game, and I have won them over into the miniatures market. That is how great and how well designed this game is. In all honesty, I like the stuff that Mantic's designed. I got Dreadball. I think Dreadball is a fantastic game. Kind of had some of the same issues with the miniatures. I like Deadzone. I have a lot of fun with it. Again, it's another miniatures game I'm really enjoying. It's actually at the point now where, since Mantic is basically rekindling my great childhood I had with Games Workshop, I mean, they brought forth Blood Bowl as Dreadball. They brought Necromunda back as Deadzone. I'm waiting for Mantic to announce the next Advanced Hero Mantic Warzone Quest miniatures dungeon crawl game, because as soon as I do it, I know I'm throwing more money at the company. They have a great designer in Jake Thornton. It's just, I just want to make sure you understand that if you're interested in this game, you're going to have a little bit of frustration before you get this game to the table. If you can get over that hurdle, you have a great gameplay experience ahead of you. Now, enough harping on the quality of the components that actually caused me the frustration. I want to talk to you about the good things with the game. The game comes with a very solid rule book. It's almost 80 pages worth of stuff. Now, granted, a lot of those pages are fluff, a lot of background, and stuff from the Mantic Warpath Universe, which is basically where their Deadzone is taking place. Now, Deadzone has a lot of theme to it, and they did a fantastic job adding a lot of fluff to the game rulebook to help you get into the theme of Deadzone. The rulebook also comes with campaign play if you want to play this game, which is probably the best way to play is campaign play. Now, I didn't show you how to play the campaign because I didn't want to confuse the tutorial. I think I gave you enough to understand how to play the game so you can decide if you want to look into more of it, but I can tell you the campaign system is fantastic. There's lots of different scenarios, including the PsyOps campaign, and lots of things that you can do to make this gameplay extend over a long period of time, which is awesome in my opinion. The rulebook does a great job of laying out the rules for the game. Now, there's a couple errors in the rulebook. I think there's about 8, maybe 9. Thankfully, Jake Thornton, the designer of the game, has his own website, quirkworthy.com, and I'll add a link in the bottom of the video right here for you to follow if you like. But basically at that website, he keeps continuously FAQ updated with the errata for the game and comments and questions. Now, the really cool thing about this game is there's only 3 pages of FAQ so far, which is fantastic for any kind of game of this, which has miniatures and this kind of movement and scale and this kind of gameplay. You can look at a lot of miniatures games these days, and I can probably throw out a few names, but I'm not going to mudsling right now. But there's a few of those miniatures games that just recently came in the market that have 9, 10, 20-page FAQs, which are rather frustrating, where you basically have almost rewritten the rule book. Mantic has done a fantastic job with the designer Jake Thornton of doing a really good job of making sure this is not a lousy rule book. There's about 8 errors in the rule book. Go to the quirkworthy.com, download the FAQ, make a couple corrections in the rule book, and you're good to go. The game also comes with a lot of cards. Now, these cards are very, very thick, very high quality. These cards have a very good laminate on them. These cards are going to last a heck of a long time. There's no reason at all to sleeve these cards. They're each thick. They're extremely hardy, very durable. They did a fantastic job. Additionally, each one of the unit cards has a picture of what each one of the models will look like when they're fully painted, which is a really, really nice touch. It gives you some ideas if you want to go ahead and paint these miniatures. Now, you can be lazy and go ahead and just spray paint all your play guys red with spray paint, and then spray paint all your enforcer guys black or blue, whatever you want to do, or maybe commando green if you want to just do it quick and easy. But if you don't want to and you want to go paint these miniatures and make them look really, really good, there's some great ideas on these stat cards to give you some ideas of ways to paint these miniatures. I also like how they went ahead and added stats for extra miniatures that don't even come in the game box. So if you have some proxies and want to see how these guys play out, you can definitely do that. I also like how there's more missions in the game than you actually need. Each unit, each side gets 8 different missions, which all play differently. And also each team is going to get about 35 battle cards. Now, if you looked at the tutorial, I showed you're only going to use about 20 of these every time you play. So between the mission cards, the battle cards, and all the extra unit cards, you have a heck of a lot of replay value in this box for $100. Additionally, the game comes with a game board, which I can't really call it a game board because it's made out of a mouse material, which is really, really cool. Actually, after I got this mouse mat material and saw just exactly how cool it is, I went back to Mantic's website and I actually ordered the Dread Ball Ultimate Gaming Mat, which is also rubber mat. So I can play that game with the rubber mat also, which I think this is much, much better than the standard boards that you get that are made out of cardboard. This is going to last longer. It looks a lot cooler and is a heck of a lot easier to store. And for some reason, I just like this infinitely better than your standard game board. Overall, for $100, I think you're actually getting a pretty decent value for your money. Now, I agree, $100 for a game can be a lot of money, especially, if you're operating on a budget. I can see that point. I can also see that the game only comes with 25 miniatures. So again, $100 might seem a little bit on the high point. But understand, on top of these miniatures, you're getting all this moldable terrain. Now, granted, you're probably going to end up gluing these like I had to. These are all glued together, so they're not going to fall apart. I basically got tired of fighting those little connectors. The only thing that actually removes is this bridge for easy storage in the game box. And that is another nice thing. Everything does fit back in the game box, so you can store everything without you having to go out there and buy tackle boxes and everything. Definitely a plus. The game has more enough tokens for you to signify all the overwatch, the injuries, the wounds, and everything. You're definitely going to have a lot to cover. You don't have to worry about having to go out and buy extra tokens or running short there. The cards are great quality. Everything is really good. Again, $100 may seem a little bit on the high point, but I think for what you're getting in the box, for the quality, it's not really that bad. And to be perfectly honest, I've already seen this game on Amazon.com for $80, so even for $80, you got a really good deal. Every time I do a review for a board game, it's always very important for me to sit down and take a few moments to discuss the family friendliness and the perfect player count. Well, luckily, perfect player count is going to be pretty easy for me to comment in this game. It's a two-player game. There's only rules for two players, and if you want to add any more than two players, you're basically going to have to start making up your own rules at that point. So it's pretty easy to say it's a great two-player game. Having said that, though, it is possible to play with more than two players. It does take a little fiddling with the rules, and the rules themselves don't have to be fiddled with too much, but you do have to fiddle with some of the stats of each one of the teams, and also with basically what's going to happen in the layout of the board. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it can be played with more than two players. The problem is that some of the factions can be a little bit unbalanced in a more than two-player game. For example, the Plague players, if there's a lot of units on the board, they have a lot more power from their free actions on those fights. You can basically do a nice little domino effect if you got enough enemies on the board, because you can basically tear through one, tear through another, play a card, tear through another, and basically do a lot of damage very, very quickly. It does give the Plague player a slight unfair advantage. The more enemies, the more units, and the more factions you start adding to the board. So if you want to play with more than two players, understand the Plague player is going to have a slight advantage over the other players. Of course, that just means that the other players are either going to have to play smarter, or you can do what we like to do, where one person is going to play the Plague, they're going to get more than 70 points, and everybody else is going to get their own squad to try to take down the Plague, and they're basically going to have one player versus everybody else. It works out pretty darn well, and it does allow you to play the game with more than two players. Overall, though, the game is going to be played best as a two-player game, though. On the family-friendly front, the game does suggest ages 14 and up, and I think that's actually pretty fair for the game. The game is pretty complex. It is a miniatures game. There's lots of minute details to the game. Now, it would be pretty easy for a 12-year-old to play, especially with a parent who's willing to sit down and teach them the game. Or you can have two minor teenagers, probably about 12 years old or up, playing each other, especially if there's an adult present, to help teach them the game. Overall, though, the game is probably best played for ages 12 and up. And since it is a two-player game, it's probably best as a parent-child type of game, or parents sitting off to the side and basically watching two siblings play the game and kind of being the judge and the referee of the game. Overall, though, the game could be a pretty fun family game, especially if you start doing some of the campaign play, or if you manage to start getting some of the extra factions of the game and had an extra game board. That way, a family of four, two players can each be working on their own battles, and the winner of those battles can move on and kind of do the campaign play like that. So the game can be pretty good for families in that aspect, but it's still pretty much a two-player game, and it's also pretty much for ages 12 and up. Overall, my final thoughts of the game is, overall, the balance for the game actually seems pretty darn good so far. Now, it'd be impossible for me to comment and tell you that the game is going to be perfectly balanced. First of all, the game is asymmetrical. Second of all, there's 6 total factions that are going to be available for the game. 2 of them aren't even out yet, so unless I was on the design team, it's pretty much impossible for me to tell you if the game's going to be perfectly balanced or not. Looking at Jake Thornton's history with Dreadball, how he had managed to put out 12 teams that had pretty darn good balance. Now, while some people may argue that the Forge Fathers are a little bit weaker, others will argue against that. And some would have said that Jedwan were a little bit overpowered in the beginning. Luckily, Jake Thornton listened to the fans, and he also went back and modified some of their stats, managing to balance out the team really well. So, looking at his history and looking at what I've seen so far, I have high hopes for the overall balance for Deadzone. Directly out of the box for what you get for the retail box, I like the 2 asymmetrical teams that come with the game so far. I like how the buildings that you're going to play out are going to affect the game. The Plague player likes lots of buildings that they can hide behind, so they can do quick movements, run out, and just come out of behind from cover and go ahead and attack the Enforcers, whereas the Enforcers like a wide open game map to play on, so they have their range shots to start taking shots at the enemy, so they basically can't get ganged up upon. So these 2 teams do play very differently, which I think is fantastic and very cool out of the box to have 2 very asymmetrical teams that seem fairly balanced. Now, having said the game is fairly balanced, I have seen some situations where the balance is not perfect, but most of that has been able to be blamed on either not knowing your faction very well, or not estimating what your opponent was doing, or basically just doing a stupid action or maybe some bad dice rolls. But having said that, overall, again, I want to say that the balance does seem very good for the two teams directly out of the box. And again, even though there's more stuff to come, each one of these factions are still going to be modified. They still have more units to come. I'm looking at Jake Thorne's history. I am not afraid of the future balance for the game. I have high hopes here. I really do. I also really like how the game uses D8s versus a D6. Now, a long time ago, I did an interview with Jake Thorne when Dreadball first came out, and I was talking about D6s versus D8s, and how I personally thought that D8s were much better. They offer much more variety, and when you're rolling against stats and everything like that. So when they included D8s in this game, I thought that was really cool. I think it was a very nice touch, and while I'm not saying I had any way, shape, or form influence on that, I think it's great because I like games with D8s just a little bit better than D6s for the overall variety. I also like the gameplay variety added to the game from the battle cards. Now the battle cards allow you to get a little bit of extra sneaky actions off and allows you to kind of do a little bluffing against your opponent so they never quite know exactly what you're going to do. Especially if you do a move that seems like it's not really beneficial for you and your opponent's going to wonder what you're doing. And then they're going to see you play a battle card and they're going to go, oh, now I know exactly what's coming. So I definitely like the variety that the battle cards add. I also like the fact that movement and range and counting distances and line of sight is very easy and simple, but not to the point that it oversimplifies the game. It's simple enough that you can teach non-miniatures gamers how to play the game, but it's deep enough to actually allow deep tactical combat and lots of deep strategy in a game that could be seen as more simple, but somehow manages to be very complex and very, very enjoyable and challenging. And when I'm talking about deep strategy, the deep strategy for this game starts from the moment you basically open the box. From the layout of the battlefield, from the best models you're going to need for the terrain, and when you manage to purchase all the factions are going to play differently on different boards and different terrain. And remember, you're going to set up the terrain between you and your opponent, and you're going to try to make it advantageous to you, but not disadvantageous to you, while your opponent's trying to do the exact same thing. I also like how there's a whole bunch of team strategy. When you're building your team, you need to build a team that has lots of units that have lots of synergy that are going to work off each other a lot. You don't want a team that you're not going to have any synergy and you're basically going to get torn apart pretty quickly. So that's also part of the strategy of the game. I also like the hidden mission goals that come with the game. Your opponent doesn't know exactly what you're working on to try to win the game, and also stops the game from being a boring slogfest where I'm basically attacking you, trying to wipe out your team, and you're basically attacking me, trying to wipe out my team. We're basically going to slog through and go across, trying to see who's going to be the last man standing, which can make for a long, drawn-out game. This game has multiple victory conditions, and this helps ensure that you're basically going to have a game that can be played in about an hour or less once the game is set up. Now, I'm going to tell you that even though the box says the game plays in about an hour, that's actually gameplay. You're going to have extra time in the beginning where you're going to be building your force, you're going to be building the board, you're going to be doing all that setup. But once you're down the nitty-gritty and you're ready to play this game, it can very easily be played in an hour or less. Your strategy as you're playing the game is going to evolve as you plan the game. There's not going to be any time where you're going to have a set strategy. Even if you have your favorite faction, your favorite loadouts, you're still going to be modifying your strategy every time you play the game, because you have to be looking at what your opponent's doing, what your opponent is fielding, and exactly how they're fielding their units. And even from their initial deployment, you got to be paying attention. Now, if you watch the sample gameplay that I put together, you saw that I had the sniper, and I had that sniper put out right here. And just from that sniper's position, he was able to cover a lot of the battlefield because there's a lot of openings for him. Again, openings are bad for the plague player. They want a whole bunch of buildings to hide behind. So that sniper was great position. I put him in Overwatch, and you saw me take out multiple units with one single sniper before any of them were able to even cross the board. That sniper was laying out a whole bunch of damage and just taking those guys out just by parking in Overwatch and me getting some really good dice rolls. I also like how the rounds play very, very quick. Now, each player is probably going to have a squad of anywhere from 5 to 12 units. I've actually managed to play an enforcer team where I actually only had 4 units, and my leader, who had a 2-on-2 command leadership, he was able to ensure that I was able to move all my units on my turn, which means I had initiative every single round. I was able to watch what my opponent was doing and react to what they were doing, whereas opposed to my opponent was constantly trying to take control of the game and stop me from having control with all that initiative, which gave me the initial benefit of sitting back and letting my enemy come to me while I sat in Overwatch and it started picking them off. My opponent had to somehow figure out a way to defeat that strategy I was using to win the game. I also like the inherent strategy of the battle cards. Now, all these battle cards have 2 uses on them which means that sometimes using these battle cards can be an agonizing decision. Sure, you may be able to use this battle card for its +1 survive, but you may need its courage effect later on. So do you waste it for the survive now that you may save a model, or do you save it later for the courage, which you may need to save a model at a later date? All these cards have 2 abilities on that you can use, so it's always an agonizing decision of do I use it or not, or do I save it for a later date or for an instance that may never come up. I like the strategic decisions of the battle cards. I think it's really, really awesome. The game also has a lot of replay potential. There's tons of things built in the game to guarantee that this game is not going to get boring anytime soon. You have campaign play, you have the PsyOps campaign, which you can get, and I think you can download it off the internet. Again, I was a Kickstarter backer, so I got it for free, so please don't quote me on that one, but if you can find the PsyOps campaign, pick it up. It's a really cool campaign that's going to allow you to enjoy the campaign play of the game. I like how the battle mat is going to change every time you play. The building is going to be in different positions. You have a different tactical layout every time you play the game. It's not going to play the same. That's adding to the replay. You're going to be customizing your factions every time you play. You have 70 points in which to build your squad. You're going to decide which one of these units you're going to build from your 70 points, and you're going to try to be as efficient as you can and build a really good squad to go against your opponent. I have yet to ever find an actual unbeatable combo. I've seen some combos that have taken my opponents by surprise, and a lot of those has been using the sniper for the enforcers, and I've also had a lot of good luck using this guy and a lot of move cards, but again, I've yet to find an unbeatable tactic from either side. Everything seems to have its Achilles tendon. It's just figuring out how to use that efficiently to take out your opponent. I also like the replay value you're going to get from the missions. Now there's 8 mission cards for each faction. You're only going to use 1 mission, and all these missions do have a lot of slight variance, which is very cool. And again, those missions are hidden so your opponent never knows exactly what you're going for. I also like how this game will not stagnate and not turn into a long slog where I'm basically running from you, you're chasing after me, I'm running away from you, you're chasing after me, or the opposite where I'm chasing after you and you're running away. It's not going to happen. This game will not play for more than 20 turns. It'll time out, and at that point, whoever has the most victory points is going to win. That's an awesome inclusion of the game, and I really hate games that just turn into a little cat and mouse and get really boring really quick. And finally, last but not least, one of the really cool things I like is playing in the 3rd dimension. Climbing up these buildings and how they affect everything that goes on, and you even get bonuses from tactical height versus opponents, is really, really cool. It adds a new dimension to a lot of these miniatures games that I really like. Now you have your really old traditional miniatures games that use the rulers for movement and everything like that, where you get some of that height advantage, but it's really cool to see it in a more of a hybrid board game, and I really, really liked it. Now, all these positives, and there's a lot of positives to like about this game, but they come with a couple negatives, and I need to just basically share some of the negatives I saw with the game. First and foremost, the quality of the product, and I harped on this in the component quality, so I'm not going to go over too much. If you can look past it, go ahead and look past it. You're getting a fantastic game. If you can't look past it, it's going to be a barrier into entry for this game. I've heard that there's going to be a version of this game that's going to have all the models pre-assembled, and again, that's a rumor. I don't know if it's true, and if somebody tells me it's true, that's going to be really awesome because it'll be really, really good, because I think this game is a fantastic hybrid of a miniatures game and a board game, and I think Mantic is really missing out on a large segment of the market if they concentrate only on the minis gamers. There are a lot of people who play board games, and we're talking about the standard non-miniatures board games, who will check out this game, and if they don't have to assemble everything, they're going to love what they see here, and they're really going to enjoy this game. So Mantic, if you haven't put out a package that has these all pre-assembled, I really highly suggest you do so, because you have a market segment who would just gobble this up and have a lot of fun with it. The other major negative I have for the game is the game can be pretty brutal and pretty unforgiving at times. Now, it can be brutal towards you if you do a sucky job building your squad versus your opponent, and your opponent's just able to pick them apart because you're basically playing stupidly. There's really no catch-up mechanic in this game. If you play dumb, you're going to be sniped apart, you're going to be taken apart, and there's no comeback from it. Your opponent's going to destroy you. Whether that's because you played badly and didn't move your miniatures efficiently, if it's because you weren't using your surroundings well, or whatever, it's easy to pretty much get destroyed in this game just from a couple bad decisions. Also, the luck of the dice can also play into this. If you watch my sample gameplay, you saw one instance where I took 3 guys who were awesome at hand-to-hand combat, who were trying to take out one solo figure and one square, and all three of those guys were unable to take out one guy, even though at one point I think I was rolling 8 dice to 2 dice, and I still was not able to take out this one guy. That's the fickleness of Lady Luck. That's the fickleness of dice, and while it won't happen a lot, it can get very frustrating for you. Additionally, and this goes along with poor squad selection, it is actually possible to sometimes exploit the rules a little bit in the game, and basically it's going to be by abusing size of the miniatures. If you have a miniature like this who's a size 3 guy who can't go on walkways, and if you happen to have a couple guys who are going to sit on the walkways, especially if you happen to have a sniper, these 3 guys can pretty much sit here and snipe at him until you time out the game, and this guy will never be able to attack him. Now that's pretty much, you can say that's an exploit, but you can also say that was pretty poor planning on this player's part by concentrating on one model and not looking at your battlefield before you built your squad and then going into the game. Yes, it's an exploit, but yes, it's also poor management of the plague player. So that's all part of the decisions of the game, and you may find some instances like that in the game, but 99% of the time, at least from my experience, you can blame it on either poor management or just poor deployment or something along those lines. And even in this example, there's a way around it. You can basically move this guy around until you find a frag grenade, throw the frag grenade up here, blow them to smithereens, and teach your opponent never to use that tactic ever again. At least that's what I did. There's also a slight learning curve to the game, learning what all the various powers on each one of these models mean. You have to learn what slow means. You have to learn what deliberate means. You have to learn what teleport means. You have to learn what mutant means. Mutant's a pretty easy one, but it's just, there's going to be a lot of these special abilities on all these unit cards that you're going to have to learn. My suggestion is you go to the rule book, write down exactly what every one of these abilities do, and just write one sentence exactly what they do. Print it out and hand that to each player. It's going to speed up your gameplay a lot. After a while, once you get used to these words, it gets a lot easier, but when you're first learning what all these abilities mean, it can be a chore, and you're going to notice that you're going to be taking the rule book and you're going to be passing it back and forth between the players while you're looking up exactly what each ability means and how it affects your unit. And also, and this is a very, very small nitpick, they use, I'd call them some unusual symbols that, you know, they're easy to learn, but it could have been odd for you to learn. They use a star symbol to show that you can use this card on your turn, and they use a skull symbol to mean that you can use it as a reaction card. I think it would have been easier to just use an R symbol for reaction or a T for your turn, but they went with a star and a skull. So that's kind of a minor, very, very minor complaint. I'm kind of nitpicking at this point. Overall, though, I think Deadzone is a fantastic game. I think Mantic has another fantastic board game, hybrid game on their hands here. I am basically an old school Games Workshop gamer who basically cut his teeth on Space Hulk, Blood Bowl, Advanced Hero Quest, and in my opinion, Mantic is doing a fantastic job of bringing back all these games that I really enjoyed in the 80s, modernizing them, improving on the gameplay, and making me enjoy all these classic games from my childhood all over again, but just infinitely, infinitely better. Granted, these miniatures that come with the game in the plastic have some issues, but again, once you get past them, it's not a big deal, especially if you're willing to glue these buildings together. So it's a hurdle, but you can definitely get over it. I can't comment on the balance of the game because there's no way to guarantee it's going to be balanced, but I'm pretty sure the game is going to be balanced once it's finally released with all 6 factions. I have no doubt about that this time. I know Jake Thornton's history. I saw what he did with Dreadball. I'm pretty sure he's going to have this game be balanced. I like how the game plays very fast. You can play this game in under an hour. I like how you can teach this game to board gamers, and you don't have to pull out the rulers, and you can have a heck of a lot of fun with this game in an hour or less. This has been another off-the-shelf board game review looking on Deadzone from Mantic Games. Thanks again for watching.